The morning rush in Manhattan was always a storm of noise, motion, and energy. Taxi horns blared along Fifth Avenue, commuters in tailored suits weaved through the crowd with coffee cups in hand, and the towering skyscrapers gleamed under the pale morning sun. For most New Yorkers, this chaos was routine. For Clara Dawson, it was survival. She sprinted through the revolving doors of the King Enterprises building, her heels clacking against the marble floor. Her heart raced, not just from the jog across the street, but from the realization that she was late. Again. She hated being late, but New York had its own ways of conspiring against punctual people. Traffic jams, subway delays, or in her case, an old woman crossing too slowly at the pedestrian lane. Clutching her folder to her chest, Clara muttered to herself, "Okay, you can make it. Just the 20th floor. In and out. No one notices a 2-minute delay." She darted toward the elevators, her dark curls bouncing behind her, and slipped inside just as the doors began to close. Relief washed over her, until she felt it. Crunch. The sharp heel of her stiletto landed squarely on someone's foot. Not just a foot, an expensive polished leather shoe that now bore the faint mark of her misstep. "Are you blind?" A deep voice snapped, low and furious. Clara froze. Her eyes traveled upward, past the expensive navy suit that fit like it was tailored by angels, past the silk tie knotted with precision, until they met a pair of stormy gray eyes that could have frozen fire. Oh no, it was him. Alexander King. The Alexander King. The elusive, intimidating CEO whose name was plastered across the building she worked in. He was young for a CEO, barely mid-30s, but already known in the financial world as a ruthless visionary. Rumor had it he never smiled, never forgave mistakes, and never let anything slip by him. And Clara had just stabbed his shoe with a heel. I'm so sorry," she stammered, stepping back instinctively. Heat flooded her cheeks. She adjusted her blazer nervously, trying to compose herself. It was an accident. His jaw tightened, and he looked down at the faint scuff mark. His voice was like ice. "You should watch where you're going. I don't tolerate clumsy people in my building." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. A dozen retorts burned on her tongue. "Excuse me, it's not like I did it on purpose." But the sheer intensity of his glare pinned her in silence. The elevator hummed upward, carrying them in suffocating quiet. Clara clutched her folder tighter, her eyes glued to the glowing floor numbers as if staring hard enough could make the ride faster. But she felt his presence beside her, tall and imposing, radiating authority that pressed against her like invisible weight. She hated the way her heart pounded. Not from fear. From something else. Something she refused to name. When the elevator dinged at her floor, Clara all but bolted out, her heels clicking frantically against the corridor. She didn't dare look back, but she knew, she felt, those gray eyes following her until the doors closed again. As she reached her office and collapsed into her chair, she buried her face in her hands. "Great. Just great," she muttered. "Day one of the merger and I've already made an enemy out of the CEO." Little did Clara know, that single misstep was not the end. It was the beginning of a war, of a spark, and of something neither she nor Alexander could have anticipated. Clara spent the rest of the morning trying to shake off the humiliating elevator incident. She threw herself into work, answering emails, scanning proposals, and updating spreadsheets, but her mind kept drifting back to the tall, intimidating figure with piercing gray eyes. Unfortunately, fate, or bad luck, wasn't finished with her. By noon, her department was summoned for a joint meeting with the newly merged company's leadership team. Clara straightened her blazer, clutched her notepad, and marched into the gleaming glass conference room. She took a deep breath. This was her chance to prove herself professionally, to show she was more than the woman who stepped on the CEO's shoe. The room buzzed with chatter until the doors opened. Silence fell. Alexander King entered. He moved with a confidence that silenced the room without a word, his presence commanding attention like gravity itself. His eyes swept across the table, sharp and assessing, until, unfortunately, they landed on Clara. For a split second, recognition flared. His lips curved, not into a smile, but something dangerously close to a smirk. Clara swallowed hard. He remembers. The meeting began. One by one, managers presented updates. Clara's turn came faster than she expected. She stood, projecting her voice clearly, explaining her team's strategy for integrating new client portfolios after the merger. She had rehearsed this. She knew the material. Her colleagues nodded in agreement, some even scribbling notes. Clara began to feel steadier, until Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. "That won't work," he said coldly. The room froze. Clara's stomach dropped. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Your model assumes steady client retention. That's unrealistic. You're ignoring volatility and market skepticism about the merger." Clara faltered, but then forced herself to stand taller. "Respectfully, sir, the data we gathered over the last quarter indicates that client loyalty remains stable. We've run simulations." Alexander interrupted, his voice clipped. "Simulations are only as good as the people who run them. In business, assumptions get people destroyed." The air thickened. A few colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, silently pitying Clara. Heat prickled the back of her neck, but she refused to shrink. "With all due respect, Mr. King," she said, her voice firmer this time, "dismissing careful analysis as assumptions undermines the expertise of the people you just acquired in this merger." For the first time, Alexander's gray eyes flickered with something, surprise. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. A tense silence lingered. Then, with a sharp exhale, Alexander shifted his gaze away. "We'll revisit the numbers later," he said curtly, ending the exchange. The meeting continued, but Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She sat down, her pen trembling slightly in her grip. She had just gone toe-to-toe with the CEO of King Enterprises, and survived. Barely. When the meeting adjourned, people filed out quickly, but Clara lingered, gathering her notes with deliberate slowness. As she reached for her folder, a shadow fell over the table. "You're reckless," Alexander's voice murmured from above. Clara froze, then looked up, meeting those gray eyes again. "Or maybe," she countered, "I just don't like being dismissed." For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. The world outside the glass walls, the traffic, the skyscrapers, the endless hum of New York, faded into silence. There was only him and her, and the dangerous spark of something neither wanted to admit. Then, just as quickly, his expression hardened. "Watch yourself, Miss Dawson. This isn't a game." With that, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Clara exhaled shakily, pressing her folder to her chest. Her mind screamed at her to stay away, to keep her head down. But deep inside, beneath the annoyance and the sting of humiliation, something far more dangerous was stirring. Not fear, not hatred, but curiosity. The office building always quieted down after 7 in the evening. The bustling crowd of employees dwindled until only a handful remained, their footsteps echoing faintly across marble halls. For Clara, staying late was nothing new. With the merger in full swing, deadlines piled up like bricks, and she didn't mind working overtime. It kept her from thinking too much about a certain CEO with storm-gray eyes. She rubbed her temples, shut her laptop, and finally gathered her things. The building's silence pressed down on her as she made her way to the elevator. She exhaled a long breath of relief when she saw the glowing button. Home was waiting. Peace was waiting. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and she stepped inside. But before the doors could close, a hand slipped between them. The metal panels parted again, and in walked Alexander King. Clara's stomach clenched. Of all people. He stepped inside as though he owned not only the company but the air itself. His suit jacket was undone now, his tie slightly loosened, but he still carried the aura of control. He pressed the button for the top floor, his private office level, and then leaned back against the railing. His gaze flicked briefly toward Clara, acknowledging her, before shifting back to the digital floor numbers. Clara gripped her folder tightly. "Just stay calm. Don't talk. Don't breathe too loud. You'll reach your floor in less than a minute." The elevator hummed upward. Floor 10. Floor 11. Floor 12. Jolt. The car lurched violently, sending Clara stumbling into the side panel. Her heart leapt into her throat. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed into a faint emergency glow. The elevator ground to a halt. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, her voice shaky. Alexander pressed the emergency button, his expression unreadable. He tried again. Nothing. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. Power interruption. It happens. Happens. Clara stammered, her pulse racing. We're stuck between floors. He shot her a quick glance, eyes cool. Panicking won't get us out any faster. I'm not panicking, she snapped automatically, though her trembling hands betrayed her. The silence stretched heavy between them. The air felt stifling, close, as though the elevator itself was holding its breath. Clara slid down against the wall, hugging her knees. She hated confined spaces. She hated being powerless. And most of all, she hated being trapped here with him. Minutes ticked by. Clara's breathing slowed, though her chest still rose and fell unevenly. She dared a glance at Alexander. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't nervous. He stood straight, hands in his pockets, like a man immune to fear. Finally, she broke the silence. You're surprisingly bad at small talk for a CEO. His head turned slightly, eyes narrowing in faint amusement. And you're surprisingly reckless with your heels. Her lips parted, then curved despite herself. Oh, you're never going to let that go, are you? A shadow of a smile tugged at his mouth. So brief she almost missed it. No. The banter felt strange, unexpected. Not filled with venom like before, but with something lighter, almost dangerous in a different way. Clara felt the tension shift, not dissolve, but bend, like a rope pulled tight that might snap or tie them closer. The elevator remained unmoving, but the atmosphere inside had already begun to change. For the first time, Clara saw Alexander not as the ruthless CEO who dismissed her ideas, nor the man whose shoe she ruined, but as someone undeniably human, someone with hidden edges she couldn't yet define. And Alexander, though silent, found his eyes drifting toward her more often than he cared to admit. The storm had not broken yet, but the first crack in the ice had appeared. The elevator had been still for almost an hour. At first, Clara kept glancing at the emergency panel as if sheer willpower could make the buttons work again. Then she fiddled with her phone, only to realize there was no signal. Finally, she surrendered to gravity, sliding down the cool metal wall and hugging her knees. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. Across from her, Alexander remained standing, straight-backed, immovable, his hands tucked in his trouser pockets. He looked like he belonged in a magazine spread, CEO Survives Elevator Breakdown with Perfect Posture. Clara rolled her eyes. You know, for someone who runs a billion-dollar company, you're surprisingly terrible at small talk. His gaze shifted lazily toward her, one brow arched. Small talk is a waste of time. Really? She tilted her head. Because right now, time is all we have. For the briefest second, something flickered in his expression, an almost smile, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She sighed dramatically. Fine. Then I'll just talk to myself. At least I won't be judged for accidentally murdering a pair of designer shoes. This time, his lips curved ever so slightly. Clara caught it. Her heart stumbled. Oh my God, she gasped theatrically, pointing at him. Was that a smile? Did I just witness the rarest phenomenon in New York City? He let out a short laugh, quiet, unexpected, and disarming. You're insufferable. Her grin widened. And you're human. Who knew? Silence settled again, but it wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It was softer. Clara leaned her head back against the wall, watching the dim emergency light glow above them. For a moment, she forgot she was supposed to hate him. You don't really hate me, do you? She asked suddenly, her voice quieter now. Alexander's gray eyes sharpened, studying her. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, No, I don't hate you. His voice dropped lower, almost reluctant. I just don't know why you get under my skin. Clara blinked, startled by the honesty. The great Alexander King, admitting uncertainty? It almost didn't seem real. She smirked lightly, though her chest tightened in ways she didn't expect. Maybe because I'm the only one in this building who's not afraid of you. His lips pressed into a thin line. He looked away, as though hiding something. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was charged, alive with an energy Clara couldn't name. For the first time since the merger, she saw him not as the untouchable CEO who dismissed her ideas, but as a man, flawed, guarded, layered with mysteries she suddenly wanted to unravel. The elevator groaned faintly, a reminder they were still trapped, yet Clara didn't mind as much anymore. Being here with him was maddening, but also strangely intoxicating. When she caught his eyes drifting back toward her, lingering a second too long, her heartbeat betrayed her, skipping wildly. She quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her folder. The cracks had begun to form. The ice was breaking. Neither of them knew it yet, but the war between them was slowly shifting into something far more dangerous. Not hatred, not rivalry, but the beginning of desire. The hum of the stalled elevator had faded into silence. Time blurred. Clara wasn't sure if they had been trapped for 1 hour or 3. The dim emergency light flickered above them, throwing their faces into soft shadows. It felt as if the world outside had disappeared, leaving only this metal box, and the two of them inside it. Alexander had finally left his rigid stance and sat across from her, his long legs stretched out carelessly. The sight almost startled Clara, the great Alexander King, untouchable CEO, sitting on the floor like any other human being. "Does this happen often?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. He tilted his head, studying the ceiling. "Not often, but long enough to test patience." "You mean your patience?" she teased gently. "Mine was tested the moment you started insulting my analysis in that meeting." His lips twitched. "You're still holding on to that?" "Of course." Her eyes narrowed playfully. "Do you always have to be so cold?" He looked at her then, really looked, his storm-gray eyes locking with hers. His voice, when it came, was quieter, rougher. "It's easier." Clara blinked, caught off guard. "Easier than what?" He hesitated, the pause heavy with unspoken weight. Then he sighed, almost as if admitting something to himself. "Easier than caring. People expect strength. They expect perfection. If you let them see anything else," he trailed off, shaking his head. For a moment, Clara saw the man beneath the armor, the one who carried invisible burdens. Her heart softened despite her better judgment. "You don't have to be perfect all the time, you know," she said gently. "Even kings need to take off their crowns once in a while." His gaze lingered on her, searching her face, as if no one had ever dared speak to him that way before. The elevator felt warmer suddenly, their breaths mingling in the closed space. "I shouldn't tell you this," Alexander murmured, almost to himself, "but since that first day, I haven't been able to get you out of my head." Clara's breath caught. "Me?" His lips curved in the faintest, most vulnerable smile she had ever seen on him. "Yes, you. The woman who stepped on my shoe and then challenged me in front of an entire boardroom. You're infuriating and unforgettable." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to keep a professional distance. He was her boss, the CEO, the man she swore she hated. But her heart, traitorous and wild, surged forward. "Alexander," she whispered, unsure what else to say. He leaned in just slightly, his voice low. "Tell me to stop, and I will." But she didn't. She couldn't. The tension between them was no longer sharp like a blade, but magnetic, pulling them together. In the dim light, with the world shut out, Clara realized the truth she had been denying since the moment she first looked into his stormy eyes. She didn't hate him. She wanted him. The elevator finally jerked back to life sometime past midnight. With a groan of machinery and a flicker of fluorescent lights, the car slowly rose until the doors slid open on the 20th floor. For a moment, neither of them moved. Clara sat frozen, still feeling the echo of Alexander's words. His almost confession, the way his eyes had burned into hers in the dim glow. She hugged her folder against her chest, as if to steady her racing heart. Alexander was the first to rise. He offered her his hand, a simple gesture that carried far too much weight. After a hesitant pause, Clara took it. His grip was firm, steady, grounding. The world outside the elevator felt suddenly colder once they stepped back into the wide, empty hallway. "Good night, Miss Dawson," Alexander said, his voice measured but softer than she had ever heard before. She opened her mouth, wanting to respond, but words failed. By the time she found her voice, he was already walking away, his tall figure disappearing around the corner. The next morning, Clara half expected everything to return to normal, that he would sit at the head of the conference table, cold and sharp, cutting her off mid-sentence as though nothing had changed. But it didn't. When she presented updates during the morning meeting, Alexander didn't interrupt. In fact, he asked her opinion, specifically hers, on several key issues. His tone was calm, respectful, almost protective. Her colleagues glanced at each other in surprise, whispering silently with raised brows. Clara tried to ignore the heat rising in her cheeks. Later that day, as she walked past his office, she caught him glancing at her through the glass wall. Not a glare, not a scowl, just a look. One that lingered too long, one that made her heart skip in dangerous ways. Over the next week, the shift became undeniable. Alexander began inviting her into high-level discussions, not to tear down her ideas but to build on them. When another executive tried to dismiss her proposal, Alexander cut in sharply, saying, "Miss Dawson's analysis is solid. We're moving forward with it." Clara nearly choked on her coffee. Since when did Alexander King defend anyone? Yet, the most confusing moments weren't the professional ones. They were the fleeting, stolen seconds when their eyes met in the hallway, when his hand brushed hers as he handed her a file, when his voice softened ever so slightly when speaking only to her. It was dangerous. It was intoxicating. And it was becoming impossible to ignore. One evening, as Clara gathered her things, she found him waiting by the elevator. Just like that night. "Long day?" he asked, his voice casual but edged with something deeper. She blinked. "You? Making small talk? I must be hallucinating." His lips curved in that rare, subtle smile. "Don't get used to it." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside together, and though this time it didn't stall, the memory of being trapped inside lingered, thick between them. As the doors closed, Clara's heart pounded with a terrifying realization. She wasn't just curious about him anymore. She was falling. And judging by the way Alexander's gaze lingered on her reflection in the mirrored elevator wall, he was too. It had been 3 weeks since the night they were trapped. 3 weeks since Alexander's carefully built walls had started to crumble, and since Clara's heart had betrayed her by choosing the one man she swore she despised. The entire office had noticed the change, though no one dared speak of it openly. Alexander King, the CEO known for his icy demeanor, no longer treated Clara Dawson as an adversary. Instead, he sought her out in meetings, defended her strategies, and, most shocking of all, actually listened. Whispers circulated around the cubicles like wildfire, but Clara tried to ignore them. She knew better than anyone how dangerous this was. Mixing business with, whatever this was, could destroy everything she had worked for. And yet, every stolen glance, every rare smile, every brush of his hand against hers told her the truth. She was already too far gone. On a Friday evening, long after most employees had gone home, Clara stayed late finishing a proposal. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets, when a soft knock at the door startled her. Alexander stood there, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, his storm gray eyes unreadable. "You're still here," he said, stepping inside. "So are you," Clara replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then Alexander spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Clara, I've spent years keeping people at arm's length. I thought it was strength. But ever since you walked into that elevator," he paused, as though weighing every word, "you've undone me." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. "Alexander." He stepped closer, his gaze locking with hers. "I don't care about the board. I don't care about gossip. All I care about is you." The world tilted. She tried to speak, to joke, to deflect, but all that came out was a shaky laugh. "So what? You want me to step on your shoes again? Is that your idea of romance?" To her surprise, he laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that transformed his entire face. "If that's what it takes to keep you, yes." Something inside Clara melted. The tension, the fear, the war between them, it all dissolved, leaving only the undeniable truth. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Later, as they walked toward the lobby together, the memory of that night returned. Without a word, Alexander pressed the button for the elevator. The doors opened, and they stepped inside. The car began to rise, smooth and steady this time. The mirrored walls reflected their figures, the powerful CEO and the fiery project manager, standing side by side. Halfway up, Alexander turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "The first time we were here, I almost lost my mind." Clara tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled, softer than she'd ever seen. "Now, I never want to leave." Her breath caught as he leaned closer, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both inevitable and breathtaking. The elevator carried them upward, but for Clara, it felt like flying. Enemies no longer. Lovers at last. And as the doors opened again, spilling golden light into the car, Clara knew the truth. That cramped metal box had given her the greatest gift of all: fate. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Until we meet again in the next story, take care and keep the magic of imagination alive.